So last week I said I was going to make a video on the moon. And I did. The moon has been repurposed multiple times throughout different forms of entertainment. It has a face on it, Captain America lives on it, it's made of cheese, it was formed by a culmination of all the hearts in the universe to fill the nothingness of people who aren't even meant to exist. It's just never consistent. And today I want to talk about the inconsistencies in the use of the moon in video games. And the reason being is because I can. You see, in the world of video games, just like in the world of literature and anything else in the entertainment business, use fiction and science fiction. And a lot of it, with the goal of making a spicier version of reality. They pull elements from the real world and bend them to their liking in a creative space. For example, the whole thing about gems, crystals, and anything else clear and shiny having the ability to store magic within them. But the moon is a different story. It's one of the things that doesn't follow one rule. In Yoshi's Island, the moon is just a pretty decoration in the sky. But there's one level where the moon is sticking out like a sore thumb in the background, and at first glance you'd think that's a really pretty moon. But then it's made clear later in the level that it wasn't there as a decoration, but rather to set up the boss fight, which takes place on the moon. It's one of the most unexpected boss fights in my opinion, and one of the most unique. With the way Yoshi circles are on the moon, it's kinda like a Mario Galaxy planet, but in 2D. And speaking of Mario, the same kind of setup was used in a more recent Mario game, Super Mario Odyssey, where throughout the whole adventure the moon is shown very prominently in both the levels and the overworld map. People online were even speculating the moon being a location we could visit months before the game's release, and I myself even remember people online suggesting that the final boss could take place on the moon. And it did. Unsurprisingly. But after the final boss, there's a segment where you have to try to escape the inside of the moon while possessing Bowser. And after beating the game, you could revisit the moon, where now you'll unlock a dark and darker side of the moon, where you can enter the moon again, but this time for a boss, gauntlet, and a challenge level. This is the only time I've played a game that had you traverse the inside of the moon, so in my opinion, this is pretty cool. Another series that used the moon in a unique way was Castlevania Aria of Sorrows. The Castlevania series is all about these buff vampire hunters going out and killing Dracula every few centuries. The majority of those vampire hunters were part of the Belmont clan, and the final Belmont in the timeline actually used the moon to defeat Dracula. Essentially what he did was seal Dracula's castle within the moon. It was really the only way to stop the castle from coming back and trying to pick a new Dark Lord to be the host of its castle-ness. Despite not being used for gameplay like in Yoshi's Island, or being a location you could visit like in Super Mario Odyssey, the moon in Castlevania Aria of Sorrows is an example of the moon being used for plot purposes. But after the moon served its use in the plot, it's just a nice background element at that point. So far these examples I've given are the only uses I've seen possible for the moon.
You know, what about the atmosphere and the feeling of being on the moon?
Who are you and how did you manage to get into my video?
Oh, the atmosphere of the moon is incredible! You get to see the night sky and get the experience of being out in space, and there's one game in particular that I think does a great job in reflecting on this extraterrestrial feeling, Celeste. In Celeste, there are 8 chapters you can play, with the 9th one that came out as a free DLC called the Farewell Chapter, and that's what I want to talk about today. This chapter takes you to the moon after chasing a bird that Madeline, the character you play as, believes is a reflection of the humble character Granny that died sometime before the DLC. And canonically by gaming too hard. In Madeline's journey to chase the bird, she travels through difficult crevices, all part of the moon. She's given many abilities to dash throughout the obstacles, and in the background there are these starry skies and space junk flying around. And in the background of this gameplay, there's excellent synth and violin music composed by Lena Raine, and both of these instruments are associated with the moon. So we've established how Celeste's farewell correlates with the moon, but how does the atmosphere of the moon play a part in the game? Well, in case you've never played Celeste before, this game takes a ton of clever spins on representing the activities of the human mind. Through the whole game of Celeste, Madeline deals with anxiety and depression, and they give way to showing you how these feelings work with symbols like Madeline's counterpart, Madeline. But what does the human mind have to do with the atmosphere of the moon? Well, in the Farewell chapter, instead of Madeline dealing with depression and anxiety, she deals with grief. Grief for Granny, who is no longer with her. To give context, yes, the whole Farewell chapter is a dream. It's all in Madeline's head. The developers chose the moon as a setting for someone trying to overcome the struggles of grief because the moon is an excellent way to represent the feelings of being lost, scattered, and unable to move, just like the feeling of grief. To explain this, for those of you who live under a rock, unless it's a moon rock, the moon has less gravity than on Earth. This concept isn't actually in the gameplay mechanics. Madeline doesn't actually have less gravity on the moon here, but during the challenging levels on them, she's given even more verticality and movement space, which gives you the feeling of being out in the ungravitated moon. This atmosphere effect of feeling less gravity is something that would make you feel decisionless, scared, or confused, right? Bouncing slowly through the air, no contact on the ground, you're much more dependent on wherever momentum tells you to go, so this would be correct. Now then, what else makes someone feel decisionless, scared, or confused? I think you know where I'm going here. This game's spin on the atmosphere of the moon is incredibly well mixed with the feelings of grief that the farewell chapter is attempting to represent. I could go on for hours about how farewell represents grief in other ways, but Daniel wanted me to talk about the moon, so I guess this is where it ends.
Wow. After listening to Crafty, I think I finally realized what the moon has in common in all these scenarios. Atmosphere. I mean, sure, atmosphere isn't the same. It depends on the context of the situation, whether it be the characters or the environment. But the moon is consistent with its inconsistent atmosphere. What does that mean? The moon is always atmospheric, even though the atmosphere isn't always the same. Here's an example of atmosphere. Let's compare these two Zelda games, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Upon starting up The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, the first 3D Zelda game, you're greeted to the moon. Beautiful and bright, illuminating the sky as Link rides on horseback across Hyrule. The moon slowly sets, giving way for the sun to rise on this new adventure. In this case, it's kind of like a new beginning. The moon is moving out of the way for the new, bright morning. Now let's look at Majora's Mask, where this hideous thing is looking down at you every minute. Throughout the game, you are trying to stop the moon from crashing into the world, and in order to do that, you are going through this time loop, resetting every 3 days. It's kind of eerie when you start the game and everyone's just having fun, preparing for this festival, but then you look up at the sky and you see this face that's just angry all the time. And you start feeling this sense of stress and urgency when it starts inching closer and closer. Even more so when you reach the final day and the earth is just shaking. So while Ocarina of Time has this moon that's positioned in such a way within the introduction where it just seems like it's leading up to a new beginning, Majora's Mask has this moon that is falling closer and closer into you, just giving you this feeling of imminent death and destruction. Zelda isn't the only game that gave me such a powerful and emotional feeling in regards to the moon. When you're early on in a playthrough of Minecraft, the normal thought process is night equals monsters. But after you've settled in and you're more prepared to handle those types of things, the moon is just a beautiful piece of eye candy in the background. It always had me thinking, what can I do next? And Slime Rancher's massive and overwhelming moon just makes me want more. Seeing it rise across the slime sea just always made me think, I wonder what else is out there. It can't just be this small island, right? But in the end, it's just a game, and it can never beat the real moon. But seeing all these fictional scenarios just makes me feel a lot safer and just a greater appreciation to what we all share. The same sky, the same sun, the same moon. It may not be as big or as dangerous as it is in fictional worlds, but it's real, it's beautiful, and above all, it's ours.